We've seen the Metroid, now here's the Vania. It's episode 13 of Metroidvania Works. There are two trademarked names in the word Metroidvania, Nintendo's Metroid and Konami's Castlevania. The exploratory, free-roaming, RPG-inflected nature of Metroidvania games was present in Metroid from day one, but Castlevania took a little longer to warm up to its noble task. The original Castlevania was as non-exploratory an action game as you could hope for, a 6-stage march through a haunted castle along a very definite and very finite path. It had no character upgrade system besides a temporary boost to the hero's base weapon that was lost each time the player lost a life. And the closest it came to backtracking was to let Simon double back momentarily to grab a hidden point bonus or something. However, as we've seen on NES Works Gaiden, Castlevania was accompanied basically on day one in Japan by a somewhat more open-ended interpretation of the same adventure known as Vampire Killer in Europe. This wasn't truly a game about exploration, since it consisted of 12 standalone stages in a rigid sequence. However, completing each level required some degree of curiosity and backtracking, not to mention a bit of inventory management, albeit in an impermanent fashion. When it came time for the sequel, Konami seemed uncertain whether to work in NES mode or MSX mode. And so that follow-up, Castlevania II Simon's Quest, aka Dracula II, Noroi no Fuin, or The Accursed Seal, splits the difference. While it incorporates NES visuals and, happily, NES control mechanics and character hitboxes, the overall feel of this adventure draws heavily on Vampire Killer. Rather than presenting players with a linear quest, however, Castlevania II spans the entirety of Transylvania. Despite the game's English title, only the final conflict takes place in Dracula's castle, which has been reduced to little more than a ruin after collapsing at the end of the first game. Simon roams the countryside, stopping into villages and seeking essential tools and permanent weapon upgrades to enhance his survivability and allow him to defeat Dracula once and for all. The game most closely resembles Vampire Killer when you spend time in the 5 mansions located around the land. Each mansion contains one of Dracula's mortal remains, which Simon must collect and burn in order to defeat the vampire once and for all. And each one plays a great deal like the standalone stages of the MSX game. Each mansion encompasses a self-contained space, lacking in the infinite loop scrolling seen on MSX, but otherwise consisting of familiar elements. There's plenty of up and down advancement to different floors of the mansion via staircases, moving platforms, and occasional leaps into the unknown. Many of the mansions require Simon to puzzle out hidden or invisible passages, either with the use of holy water to dissolve fake blocks, or by wielding Dracula's eye to reveal illusory walls. Dracula's relic in each mansion has been secured in a mystic orb, which can only be shattered with the use of an oak stake, which in turn must be purchased with hearts from merchants hiding inside of each mansion, very directly inspired by the merchants in Vampire Killer. What sets Simon's quest apart from Vampire Killer isn't simply the open-ended landscape linking these environments, but rather the need to hunt for and collect permanent power-ups and tools to enable further exploration. These must be purchased, traded for, or simply found in hidden locations, but Simon can't complete his quest without them. For example, in the very first town, Simon can purchase a white crystal whose purpose isn't immediately obvious. Though in fairness, pretty much nothing in Castlevania II is immediately obvious. It's a game designed to be opaque and to sell strategy guides. Equip the white crystal in the first mansion, however, and suddenly you'll be able to see an essential moving platform at the very entrance of the building. The platform is always there and you can leap onto it even if you can't see it, assuming you get the timing right. But without the white crystal in hand, the mansion appears to have a massive and impassable pool of water right at its entrance. That's about all that crystal is good for, but elsewhere in the world you can trade it for a blue crystal that, when wielded, allows you to reveal a false lakefront beneath which another mansion is hidden. And someone with a red crystal is dying to swap it for your blue one, which will then allow you to summon a whirlwind that carries you to yet another mansion. Other tools prove to be every bit as vital to your trip, including the aforementioned holy water, which breaks through false blocks and obstructions, and the laurels, which render you briefly invincible. Handy in combat, essential in traversing vast swaths of poisonous swamp. And in proper Metroidvania style, even the relics of Dracula you collect do more than simply act as a key to access the final battle. Well, some of them do. Dracula's heart actually is nothing more than a key. Show it to the ferryman and he'll take you to a mansion. And Dracula's ring only lets you cross the boundary to Castlevania's ruins. But Dracula's rib works as a shield that can reflect enemy projectiles, just like the shield item in Vampire Killer. His eye reveals false passages, and his nail imbues your whip with the power of holy water, allowing it to shatter false blocks. A good deal of Simon's quest involves crisscrossing Transylvania in order to collect these items and either put them to use or trade them for the next tool on Simon's Straw Millionaire chain. You also spend a good deal of time accumulating hearts, which no longer simply function as ammunition for sub-weapons such as holy water, various daggers, and the diamond, the way that they did in Castlevania. Here, hearts double as currency just as in Vampire Killer. They're essential not only for purchasing crystals and oak stakes, but also for buying permanent upgrades to your whip, consumables like garlic and laurels, and more. Enemies drop different values of heart ranging from 1 to 10 depending on their strength, and at the same time they grant Simon experience points. Yes, there's a legitimate hint of traditional by-the-stat numbers role-playing here, as in Zelda 2. As Simon gains experience points, he levels up. Increasing Simon's level doesn't actually do all that much, admittedly. In fact, it just gives him a modest hit point boost. The benefits of leveling up are greatly limited, as enemies in a given area only surrender EXP until you reach a set level, after which you receive no further experience from grinding. There's a hard level cap for the game, which is just as well since it's not particularly challenging. The biggest difficulty in completing Simon's quest comes in navigating the clues you're given by townspeople. A lot of tasks in this game are utterly unintuitive. Things like kneeling at a cliff for 10 seconds while holding a specific item. And the guidance offered by NPC dialogue is murky at best. This is by design, not the product of sloppy translations. Even in the Japanese game, Simon's Quest can be confounding. As exploratory adventures go, it's not a total win, but it's another promising marriage of action and role-playing in the style of Zelda 2. Released in Japan in August 1987, Simon's Quest wasn't actually inspired by Zelda 2, or by Metroid for that matter. Its creator cites Maze of Gallius for MSX, which appeared on Famicom a couple of weeks before Castlevania II, as the greatest influence on Simon's Quest's design.
As it happens, we'll be looking at Maze of Gallius next episode. In the meantime, the extra game for this episode takes us back over to the Sega side of things. Well, more or less.
Golvellius Valley of Doom is best known in the West for its Master System port. However, this compile-developed action RPG originally made its debut on the MSX home computer, perhaps not surprisingly given how many notable Japanese games from this era got their start on that platform. As with most MSX games, exact release date information beyond a nebulous 1987 is tough to pin down for Mao Golvellius, or Demon King Golvellius. The Master System port made its debut in late 1988. By and large, the Master System game worked largely around the same material as the MSX original. The two versions, story, world, and dungeons, were mostly identical from what I can tell. The Master System adaptation just looked a lot nicer, though those improvements would largely be backported to MSX soon after in the form of a reissue called Shin Mao Golvellius, or The New Demon King Golvellius. As you might guess from the Japanese title, Golvellius is about a quest to stop a demon called, yes, Golvellius. It appears to have been heavily inspired by both The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2, since it plays like a combination of the two games, with a little bit of Capcom's Commando thrown in for good measure. The game world here is arranged in the style of the first Zelda's Hyrule, with progress gated by items and quest achievements. While you need to purchase most of the keys required to advance in the story, these frequently will only become available once you complete certain objectives. Most of those objectives involve defeating bosses, which you'll find in dungeons located throughout the land. Rather than taking the form of the expansive top-down dungeons seen in the original Legend of Zelda, however, the dungeons in Golvellius play out more like action games. Honestly, it's not particularly accurate to compare these dungeons to those of Zelda 2. Golvellius' underground sequences are far simpler and much more linear. They're pure action challenges, playing out more like Rygar or Dragon Buster than like Zelda 2. Some dungeons scroll left to right, while others adopt a top-down perspective. The side-scrolling dungeons make use of a ratchet scrolling effect, which is to say, they only go in one direction. In fact, if you walk back and touch the left edge of the screen, you'll actually be kicked out of the dungeon and have to start all over. The same goes for the top-down dungeons, which actually scroll automatically, forcing you to fight as you scramble to stay ahead at the bottom edge. It's an odd mashup of arcade action and Zelda-esque action RPG, but it largely works, as you'd probably expect from Compile, who had a knack for combining genres in interesting ways. And while this isn't a proper Metroidvania despite its emphasis on side-scrolling action, its unusual mixture of elements made for a memorable and decidedly one-of-a-kind adventure.
Well, sort of one of a kind. Compile would explore this same quirky combination a few years later with the Guardian Legend, but that is a tale for a different episode.